I was the one who opened the door that night and almost fainted because the man standing in front of me looked like someone who had risen from the grave. His face was thin like someone who had been forgotten somewhere, his eyes were shaking like firelight inside a storm, and his whole body was shaking like it wanted to fall. My mind could not understand anything. My heart was beating fast like a drum. I felt something hot rise inside my chest because the man outside my door was my own husband, the same man I believed was dead. That place in my head where fear and shock meet started to spin. Before I could breathe well, before I could even understand life again, everything went black like night fell twice inside me. That moment was when my life scattered and started to gather again. Hours before that shocking moment, I was just a mother in a quiet house in Enugu. The clock in the sitting room made a small click sound every second. My 2 children were already sleeping in their room after our night prayer. I was the only person awake, sitting on the old brown chair that Obinna used to love. Tomorrow was supposed to be 2 years since the plane crash. 2 years since I collected the ashes they gave me and tried to accept that my husband was gone forever. 2 years since I began to carry the weight of this house alone. I tried not to think too much. I told myself to just wait for midnight prayer. That was the only way I held myself every night. Prayer in the morning, prayer in the night. That routine was like a long stick I held to cross a deep river. I did not know that same night would bring a storm that would enter my house and scatter everything I thought I knew. I stood up to check the windows because the wind outside was blowing small. Then I returned to sit down. My mind was far. My heart was tired. I was thinking about how life had changed, how I was trying my best to be strong for these children, how sometimes when they slept, I cried quietly so they would not hear me. I even whispered that maybe tomorrow, God would give me peace. I did not know peace was standing outside my gate, weak, tired, and half alive. When the wall clock reached 1:45, when the whole street was quiet like everyone had paused their breathing, when my spirit was starting to settle, that was when I heard the knock. A heavy knock, a bold knock, a knock that carried the kind of confidence I had never heard at that time of the night. I felt something move inside me, something cold. I turned my head slowly. My heart jumped 2 times. I waited to see if the knock would come again. It came again. Firm, strong, sure. That was the moment my old life ended and the new one started, walking in my direction. When I reached the door that night, my hand was shaking, but something inside me pushed me to open it. I expected to see a thief or a neighbor, or maybe even a stranger who lost his way. I was ready to shout for help. I was ready to run, but nothing prepared me for what I saw when the door opened halfway. The man in front of me was breathing like someone who had been running through darkness for years. His clothes were dirty and torn. His hair was rough. His skin was full of small scars like he had been fighting the world. But it was his eyes that held me. Those eyes were the same eyes of the man I married, the same eyes of the man whose burial I attended, the same eyes of the man I mourned for 2 years. Those eyes were the reason my legs started shaking on the ground. My mouth opened on its own. His name left my lips like a whisper that carried both fear and hope. He lifted his hand slowly as if the air was too heavy for him. He looked like someone who had been gone for too long and was begging life to take him back. Inside my ears, I heard my own heartbeat. The world felt hot and cold at the same time. Everything slowed down. I did not know if I should close the door or fall on the floor. I did not even know if I was awake or dreaming. I stepped back without planning to. He stepped forward without strength. Something inside me finally pushed me to act. I pulled him inside and locked the door quickly, like the night itself was trying to enter with him. He did not hug me. He did not smile. He did not even look around the house. He only fell on his knees in the middle of the sitting room. His shoulders started shaking. His hands covered his face. He cried the kind of cry that did not make sound at first. The kind that comes from a place deeper than pain. I stood there watching him, too afraid to touch him, because I still did not believe he was real. My mind was running. How can someone die and come back? How can someone whose ashes I collected be kneeling on my floor? How can life change in 1 second like this? I knelt down in front of him slowly. I touched his arm. He was warm. He was real. Not a ghost, not a dream. Real flesh and blood. That was when my own tears came out, asked him where he had been. His head lifted slowly. His face looked tired, like he had carried the sky on his back. He told me something that made all the air leave my chest. He said he was not on the flight that crashed. He said he never entered the plane that day. He said something happened before he reached the airport. Those words opened a new fear inside me, a fear that stayed in my stomach like a stone. I sat down beside him on the floor. I held his hand as if it would run away if I left it. My mind was ready to hear anything and nothing at the same time. My heart was waiting to break or to be healed. The house was silent. Even the clock stopped sounding in my ears. That was when he started telling me the story of how he left our house that morning and never reached the plane. The story of how his life changed in one moment. The story that made me understand that I had not lost him to a crash. I had lost him to something darker, something closer, something more painful than death. When he started talking, I felt my whole body become still, like someone had pressed pauses on my spirit. I held his hand and listened because I knew whatever he was about to say would change my heart forever. He told me he left the house that morning with his small travel bag. He was even singing softly in the car, the same way he always did when he was traveling. He said he was thinking about calling me once he reached the airport to tell me he had checked in. That was how normal the morning was. Nothing showed him that danger was already waiting at the next junction. He said the moment he turned into a quiet street close to the expressway, a black SUV with dark tinted windows blocked him from the front. Before he could reverse, another car blocked him from the back. He said his chest became tight. Before he even understood what was happening, 4 men jumped out. Their faces were covered. Their voices were rough. They pulled him out of the car like a sack of grain. They tied his hands and pushed him into the SUV. He said they covered his head with a dirty cloth that smelled like old smoke. He kept asking them what he did wrong, but they told him to keep quiet if he wanted to stay alive. When he said stay alive, something inside me shook. I held his hand tighter. He continued talking, his voice low and tired. He said they drove for a long time, twisting left and right like they did not want him to know the road. When they finally stopped, they dragged him into an old building. Later he discovered it was an abandoned slaughterhouse inside deep bush. They tied his legs, tied his hands, and pushed him into a corner like he was not a human being. For many hours he did not hear anything except the wind moving through the broken roof. Then he heard them talking. At first he thought it was normal kidnappers waiting for ransom, but the longer he listened, the more fear grew inside him. They were talking about him like he was a problem they were sent to remove. They were not asking for money. They were not talking about calling me. They were talking about waiting for someone they called Ogre to give final instruction. They even said Ogre wanted him to suffer small before his life would end. I felt my throat close when he said that. I asked him who Ogre was. He looked at me with eyes full of shame and pain. He said he did not know at first. He only knew the voice later. He only understood the truth after he heard them arguing one night. He told me there was a night heavy rain started. The kidnappers drank and started fighting among themselves. One of them shouted that their Ogre was wasting money by keeping him alive. Another one said Ogre wanted land papers and signature first. They continued fighting until one of them said the name that froze Obina's whole spirit. He said they called Ogre by a name that belonged to our family, a name we trusted, a name that shared our blood. That was the moment my heart left my chest and started beating in my throat. He said Ogre was his own younger brother. I felt something hot fill my eyes. I wanted to scream, but my voice refused to come out. The room felt smaller. My breathing became heavy. I stared at Obina, hoping he would take back the words, hoping it was a mistake, hoping it was a story that would change in the next second. But he kept looking at me with tired eyes. Eyes that had seen pain I could not imagine. Eyes that had accepted a betrayal no one should ever face in this life. That was when he told me the part that broke me completely. He said his brother wanted him gone because of land that both of them could have shared, land that could never be more important than life, land that became the reason he disappeared from us for 2 whole years. I held my chest because the pain was too heavy. I felt anger, fear, confusion, and heartbreak fighting inside me all at once. My own husband was alive, yes, but the truth that brought him back home was darker than death. When he continued the story, I sat on the floor quietly because my legs were too weak to hold me. My heart was beating strong and slow at the same time. I could not understand how a brother could plan something so evil. Abina looked at me like someone who had carried pain for too long and was finally dropping it piece by piece. He told me that after he discovered his brother was behind everything, something inside him died. He said the beatings from the kidnappers were painful, but the truth about his brother was the real wound he could not heal. He said every day inside that old slaughterhouse felt like 1 full year. They would bring him small food sometimes, only to keep him alive because Oga had instructed that he must not die yet. They beat him when he refused to answer questions about land papers and documents. Sometimes they beat him even when he had nothing more to say. The ropes cut his skin, his body became thin, his voice became weak. But every night he prayed the same prayer we used to pray as a family. He said it was the only thing that kept his mind from breaking. He told me that after some weeks he noticed something small that gave him hope. The rope they tied on his hands always rubbed against one rough metal edge of an old table. Each time they pushed him to sit there, he found a way to rub the rope slowly and gently. He did not rush. He'd not panic. He just did it little by little every night after they finished beating him. He said he kept his hope inside that small movement, even though he did not know if it would ever set him free. Then one night, God gave him a chance. A heavy thunderstorm started. Wind was blowing. Lightning was flashing. The kidnappers started drinking because they wanted to warm themselves from the cold. They argued loudly. One of them insulted Ogar again. Another shouted back. They became careless. When lightning struck a transformer somewhere far away, everything went black. The kidnappers quickly rushed outside to check their generator. That was the moment Abina pulled his hands with all the small strength left in him. The rope snapped, but what happened next almost broke his spirit again. As he stood up to escape, he stepped on a phone one of the kidnappers left charging. The screen lit up. He said the last dialed number on the phone was his brother's name. Seeing that name on that small screen made his knees weak. It was like the whole pain of the world entered his heart at once. But he knew if he stayed there to cry, they would return and kill him. So he gathered what was left of his strength, opened a small back window and squeezed his weak body through it. He said the rain was cold and heavy. The ground was muddy. He crawled until his hands could no longer feel the earth. When he heard them shouting and searching for him, fear made him move faster, even though he could barely breathe. He found a pit latrine behind one old broken structure. Without thinking twice, he hid inside the pit of that toilet because he knew that was the only place they would not check. He said he stayed there shaking, praying, fighting his own tears until morning came. When he finally came out, he walked into a small village like someone whose soul had left his body. He fell near one old tree. That was where a pastor found him. The pastor nursed him secretly because Abina begged him not to tell anyone he was alive yet. He was afraid his brother would find him again. But his fear came true. After some time, men came again and grabbed him. He was too weak to fight. They took him to another hideout, and this time his brother came in person. His brother looked him in the eyes and told him he should have just signed the land over. His brother said if he had signed, he would be alive with his family instead of suffering. As Abina told me that part, I felt a pain so deep that my eyes went dark for a moment. I could not understand how a brother could talk like that. I could not understand how someone who ate in our house could be the same person who wanted to destroy us. The betrayal felt like fire touching my skin. That was when I understood that the man sitting in front of me had not only survived kidnapping, he had survived betrayal, fear, hunger, darkness, and the wickedness of someone who shared his blood, and he was still fighting to stay alive. When he reached the final part of his story, I felt like my whole body was floating. I could not tell if I was angry, scared, thankful or broken. Everything inside me was mixing together like hot water poured into cold water. Obinna sat on the floor looking like someone who had walked through fire. His voice was soft but steady. He told me that even in the second hideout, his brother kept coming to threaten him. He said Ikenna would enter the small dark room where they kept him and stand there smiling like someone who had won a prize. He told him many things that cut deeper than any wound. He told him that nobody would ever find him, that everyone believed he died in the crash, that he should save his strength and sign the documents so his death could be fast and clean. But Obinna refused. Not because of the land, but because something inside him refused to let wickedness win. He said he prayed every night with tears soaking the ground. Sometimes he prayed without words because the pain was too much. Sometimes he prayed with anger in his chest, but that the day he heard news from one of the kidnappers that the plane he was supposed to enter had crashed, something changed inside him. He said he started shaking. He understood that even though his brother planned evil, God had used that same evil to save him from another death. He said he held that thought tight like a rope in the middle of a storm. One day he noticed one of the kidnappers was careless. The man always left his phone on record when arguing with the others. Obinna found ways to press the phone and hide it whenever they began shouting about Ikenna. He recorded voices, recorded arguments, recorded Ikenna shouting. He hid the phone under the dirty mat inside the room. He kept gathering small truth that could save him later, even though he did not know when later would come. Then the chance came. The kidnappers fought over money, big fight. They forgot to lock one side of the door well. When they left to drink outside, Obinna used all the strength he had to push that weak door. It opened, slowly, like it was waiting for him. He did not waste time. He ran, even though his legs were shaking. He said he ran through bush, fell many times, hit stones, cut himself, but he did not stop. He ran because he wanted to see his children again. He ran because he believed he would not die there. He reached a village far from the first pastor's place. People saw him and shouted because he looked like a ghost. They took him to a small clinic where he stayed for days. When he finally became strong enough to move, he thanked them and found his way back to Enugu little by little. He used the recordings on the phone to guide himself. When he finally reached our street that night at 11:45, he said he prayed one last prayer, that if I opened the door, everything would change. When morning reached, I told him we needed to end this story the right way. We needed to stop living in fear. We needed justice. So, when he slept a little, I took his phone and went outside to make a call. The police listened. They asked for the recordings. They told us not to panic. They told us to stay low and wait. Before noon, Ikenna went to the hideout to check on the prisoner. He opened the door and saw the empty room. Before he could run, police came out from behind trees and shouted for him to freeze. He turned and saw Obinna standing there. Ikenna fell on his knees like someone whose legs refused to carry wickedness anymore. He started crying and begging, but it was too late. They handcuffed him and carried him away. When Obinna came back home that day, the children ran to him. They held him like they would never let go again. I watched them and my heart finally felt light after 2 years of darkness. We gathered in the sitting room. Obinna's voice shook when he prayed. My eyes were full of tears. The children were crying and smiling at the same time. Our hands were joined. Our spirits were joined. Our family was whole again. That night I looked at my husband. He was thinner, weaker, scarred, but he was alive, and he was home. We survived a darkness that wanted to swallow us, and somehow through pain and betrayal, we found our way back to each other. That was the night I finally breathed fully again.